Hello again. Well, you will have now read and talked about a series of passages from towards the end of Luke's Gospel that talk about the last days of Jesus's physical life on earth. Today we are talking about how exactly it is that Jesus deals with the problem of sin, how Jesus can forgive us and change our lives for good. And so in that first section that you looked at, we read about Jesus bringing his disciples together for a last meal. They were celebrating the Passover. They had come into Jerusalem, part of a big festival. And that festival celebrated the day when God rescued the people of Israel many years ago through Moses and brought them out of Egypt, out of slavery. And the night before they left, God had told them to eat a meal together, to cook a lamb and to put the blood from the lamb on the doorposts of the house where they were in. Because God was going to send a judgment of death on the firstborn sons in Egypt. And that blood would state that that house had already seen a death. That lamb had taken the place of the firstborn. And so the angel of God would pass over and that household would be free of death. No one would die in it. And the Jews commemorate that every year to this day. And Jesus and his disciples were having that meal. And in the middle of the meal, Jesus does something radical. He picks up some bread and he breaks it. And he said, "This is my body given for you," or "this represents my body. Eat in remembrance of me." He takes his cup of wine and gives it to them to drink. And says, this cup represents my blood. And by the shedding of my blood, there's going to be a new covenant, a new special agreement between God and you, that you will know his peace and his blessing and his provision. You'll have seen as you read that Jesus said that the bread is given on behalf of them, and the cup is given on behalf of them as well, to them to eat, to them to drink, but on their behalf. The giving of your own cup was a way of saying, I invite you to share in everything that I have in my life, in the things that I am blessed with. And that's what Jesus was offering, all of the benefits that he had as God the Son, all of the blessings and the glory of heaven. And Jesus is saying, I'm making that available to you. And Jesus was doing that by dying. Jesus, in effect, replaces the Passover lamb and becomes the one who dies so that there's already been a death. Our sin, our failure to love God, the Bible tells us it means that we deserve death. Sin resulted in death coming into the world. Death is the natural consequence of sin because it means that we rebel against God. We choose to put ourselves first, and in our selfishness, we cause all sorts of mess so that we are responsible for the suffering and the pain and the war and the terrorism, all the horrible things that are happening in our world. We have brought death on ourselves. But it's also God's righteous judgment because we have opposed God. We've attacked him. We've said that we would rather that God was absent, God was dead. And so we deserve death. Jesus says that that bread and that cup represents that he died where I deserve to die. He received the punishment that you and I deserve on our behalf. It is as though Jesus takes my guilt, my shame, the punishment that I deserve, out of my hands and into his. Jesus has that meal, and after that meal, he and his disciples, they go out to the place where they stay at night. One of his disciples has betrayed him and leads the temple guard to find him. He's arrested, he's put on trial, It's a corrupt court, a kangaroo court. It's not a just trial. He's falsely accused in front of the Jewish leaders, then handed over to the Roman leaders, to the governor Pilate. And the next day, on the Friday, he is beaten, he is mocked, he's forced to carry his own cross, the method of execution. He's tortured, he's taken to a hill outside of the city, and he is nailed to that cross where he dies. As he dies, Jesus says these words, "It is finished." I wonder what you would have thought if you'd been there and heard those words. It is finished. It's over. I've done my best. I've given my best shot, but I've failed. It didn't work. That's how we're tempted to hear those words, aren't we? But we would be wrong. I wonder how you would have felt if you had been one of those early followers of Jesus, one of the 12 disciples, or one of the women that were with him. Some of you have run away and fled completely. Some of you have watched at a distance and seen him killed. The Saturday of waiting, great distress. Sunday morning comes. Some of the women go to the tomb. Something about that sort of first light. They wouldn't have been able to have acted the day before because it was the Jewish Sabbath. They had to stay home and rest. They were in lockdown. Sabbath morning comes and they want to pay tribute. I remember a friend of mine at university was in his room in the hall of residence and knocked a candle over or something like that, and the room went up in flames. We all had to leave the building. When the fire alarm went, we didn't realise that there was someone still trapped in there until we got the news later that evening that sadly he had died in his room. I remember that night of sleeplessness, and I remember a few of us as soon as possible the next morning going to get flowers, to get wreaths, that we could come and pay some kind of tribute to him. That awful feeling that morning of the reality of death hitting home. But the women get to the tomb, and the stone that had covered the grave has been moved back, and the tomb is empty. They meet angels, and the angels say, "Why are you looking here? This is a graveyard. Living people don't belong in graveyards. Jesus is alive. He has risen." And then gradually, some of the women first, then some of the men, and then eventually all the disciples together, they meet the risen Jesus. He comes and meets them. He eats fish to prove that he is not a ghost, not a figment of their imagination. He's real. He's alive. He has risen. He has conquered death. When Jesus on the cross said, "It is finished," he was not saying, "It's over. I failed." He was saying, "It is complete. I have won. I have achieved what I came to do." Paul, one of the early followers of Jesus, in fact, Paul had been an opponent of the church, one of the Pharisees. He tried to get early believers locked up. He has his own encounter with the risen Jesus and comes to put his faith in him to the point where even he is willing to move from being a persecutor to being a martyr for Jesus. And Paul in Romans 4 says that Jesus was handed over to death for our sin and raised for our justification. In the last talk I said that we try to justify or to excuse ourselves. Justification is a way of saying that I am in the right. If somebody walks into this room now and I take a dislike to them, and so I pull out a gun or a knife and I shoot or stab them, or I punch them and they fall over and hit their head and fall to the ground dead, I am likely to be put on trial for murder. And I might try to make an excuse. I might say I was feeling quite agitated and angry I didn't like them. They'd upset me in the past. That would be an excuse, and the judge might be a little bit more lenient to me. Probably not in that case, but I'm still guilty. But if a burglar comes into the house, and maybe he's going to attack me or to attack my wife, and I step in and I defend us, and the burglar is injured or even killed, and I've not used excessive force, I go to court and the judge says that the charge is that I've murdered. My barrister will say, but he is justified. He acted in self-defense, and I will be found not guilty. I will be found innocent. In fact, I will probably be regarded as a hero. Justification means it's just as if I had kept God's law perfectly, just as if I had loved him with my whole heart, my whole mind, my whole soul, just as if I was innocent of sin. Remember earlier I said that Jesus takes our sin on himself. There's a wonderful image, a wonderful story of a prince who falls in love with a poor woman. She's in rags. She's racked up all sorts of debt and she's lived a horrible life. But he loves her and he chooses to marry her. And on the day that he marries her, something incredible happens. You see, she becomes one with him. They're part of the same family. They are together. And so everything that is his becomes hers, and everything that is hers becomes his, which means that he takes away her rags. They belong to him now. He takes her debt on. It's his debt now. And he gives her beautiful clothes. He gives her his riches. He pays off the debt and doesn't just cancel it so she's got to start working again. No, he pays it off in full and she has full access to everything that is his. And that's what Jesus does. He takes my sin and in its place gives his righteousness because I belong to him. I am in him. I am saved. I am safe. I am forgiven. I am justified. And that's the heart of the good news that Luke wanted us to believe and to know is true. I want to encourage you to find out more about this. There's some questions to finish off. And I want to encourage you to put your trust in Jesus, the one who has taken away your sin. Thank you for watching. Thank you for joining with us.